All right, so I know I'm a little bit late to this one, but we saw another round of Twitter debates this week surrounding stabilizing muscles. And this is another one that, for whatever reason, people tend to get very worked up about. But I think that the first part of the problem with this is, again, it's driven by the semantics, where we've seen this in several different ways in strength and conditioning human performance, where terminologies between coaches may be different, but the concepts are usually not so different. And I think that applies largely here. But with this, when we think about the way that the human body is designed, we have over 600 muscles in the body. Different muscles, just as they have different fiber types, are also going to have different functionalities and responsibilities depending on their length, their position, their cross-sectional area, etc. And for that sake, there are muscles that are more predominantly stabilizing rather than producing force. So whether we're talking about the rotator cuff, or then we can consider the soft tissue that's involved, ligaments, tendons, fascia, the joint capsule, there is going to be a stabilizing mechanism that we do need to train. And that leads me to the more important point here, which is that when we get overly committed to these big compound movements and these big heavy lifts, the problem when you live and die by that is that those movements are always only going to really accentuate or incorporate the bigger muscle groups of the body, the pecs, the delts, the quads, the hamstrings. And if those are the only things that are ever being trained, then there becomes a bigger margin of deficit between these bigger predominant muscle groups and these smaller supporting ones. So this is why I have now ventured into more of the unilateral, single-sided, kind of multi-directional or omniplanar movement, because I believe that the important part of this conversation is having balance and kind of complementary ability between the bigger and the smaller muscle groups. All right, so now I got my gears going. So building off of this concept of stabilizer muscles, really the way that I've always looked at it and have kind of classified it is looking at it as contractile versus connective tissue. So for the contractile tissue, we're thinking about the force production, we're thinking about expression, we're thinking about high velocity, speed, et cetera, et cetera. The connective tissue being the fascia, the tendons, the ligaments, and, honestly, to include some of these synergistic or stabilizing muscles. I think that this is another thing. We tend to fall into this like either or category, or having to choose one side versus the other. I generally take the shotgun approach, where I want to try just about everything and then just see what is most needed or more needed and then provide just that. But back to the connective versus contractile thing. The way that I analyze this is the margin of difference between contractile capacity and connective tissue resiliency produces the opportunity for injury. So in other words, if I have somebody who is very bulky, very muscularly bound and driven, very strong in the weight room, but has trouble with things like skipping, bounding, hops, or jumps, that to me suggests that they are able to produce more force than they're able to control. Similarly, when we have people who are very springy, bouncy, and elastic, but have a lot of difficulty with a squat pattern or with a push press, they are going to put themselves in a position where they are going to be too strong central to the joint in relation to what's above and below for there to not be a problem. So all in all, I think that this is really, a good opportunity to just evaluate the types of exercises and movements that you're putting in, and then really analyzing what those training parameters are, because as we know, it's not just what's been done, but it's how it's being done that really tends to matter. And that's how you can create difference with having something being more connective tissue driven versus contractile driven.